At the end of the Second World War, the most high-profile war crimes trial took place inside of Nuremberg, a city which had been a Nazi stronghold in the years before, where Hitler's annual celebrations and rally took place. But the International Military Tribunal brought to trial 21 of the most important and powerful surviving leaders of the Nazi Party. There were a few who were tried in absentia, as Martin Bormann, the private secretary of Hitler, was nowhere to be found in the months after the end of the conflict. The courtroom handed out a number of death sentences, with those men including Hermann Göring, Joachim von Ribbentrop and Alfred Jodl being sent to the gallows inside of Nuremberg prison. It was executioner John C. Woods who carried out these executions in a botched manner, but at the end of the day the blundering hangman accomplished his mission to bring the deaths of those who were convicted of war crimes and crimes against humanity. The courtroom also gave out a number of prison sentences, with Deputy Führer Rudolf Hess and Hitler's architect Albert Speer among 7 who were sent to Spandau prison, and all of them but Hess would be released from their imprisonment, with the Deputy Führer dying under strange circumstances within Spandau. But there were 3 men who were brought to the Nuremberg trials who sat amongst the most evil and powerful Nazis, but these 3 men were acquitted of their crimes, and they were not to go to the hangman's gallows or Spandau for any actions they committed. Join us today as we look at the Nazis of Nuremberg that escaped the hangman's gallows, and as always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. There were 4 charges that the Nuremberg defendants were indicted for, and these were participation in a common plan or conspiracy for the accomplishment of a crime against peace, planning, initiating and waging wars of aggression and other crimes against peace, participating in war crimes and crimes against humanity. Each of the defendants were accused of a number of charges, some being accused of all 4, and these also related to illegal orders which had been carried out that Hitler had ordered, with many of these resulting in the executions and deaths of thousands during World War II. The judges agreed that the most serious charge levelled against the Nazis was that of aggression and aggressively waging war, but all the defendants who were charged with crimes against peace, 12 of these were convicted of this charge. The war crimes and crimes against humanity charge was the one that held up the best, and there were only 2 defendants acquitted on this. The sentences were debated a lot, and as mentioned 12 men were sentenced to death. This even included Martin Bormann, who was tried in absentia, and it was said if he had been ever captured, then he would have been executed. 7 defendants, as mentioned, became the Spandau 7, being imprisoned, as they would serve their sentences inside this underutilised prison. But there were 3 men who were actually acquitted. But who were these men? Franz von Papen was the Chancellor of Germany in 1932, and he then served as the Vice-Chancellor under Adolf Hitler from 1933 to 1934. He had been asked to become Chancellor inside of the Weimar Republic by President Paul von Hindenburg, but he was desperate following being removed from power to return, and he believed that Hitler could be controlled once he was inside of government. It was he who pressurised Hindenburg to make Hitler the Chancellor and von Papen the Vice-Chancellor, but over time his allies were marginalised and were reduced in their power, and following the Night of the Long Knives, Franz von Papen left government. He was lucky not to have been assassinated during this, as some of his allies and friends were slaughtered by the SS. But Franz von Papen then worked in the German Foreign Office as an ambassador, and in 1938 he joined the dark side, becoming a member of the Nazi Party. Hitler had offered him this role, and he believed that Austria was destined to join Germany in an Anschluss annexation. He helped Hitler achieve sovereignty over Austria, and then served as an ambassador to Turkey from 1939 to 1944. Turkey signed an alliance with France and the UK, but von Papen helped to throw some spanners into the Allies inside of Turkey, for example convincing Turkey to close the Turkish Straits to Soviet warships. But early on in 1943, Franz von Papen knew that the war was lost, and he met with spies and agents of the US Office of Strategic Services in Istanbul, and he asked for the Americans to support him when he could one day become dictator once Hitler was out the way. The American president rejected this and ordered OSS to stop conversations with von Papen. He was being considered to become an ambassador to the Vatican, but in August 1944 he had a last meeting with Hitler in Germany, and was awarded the Knight's Cross of the War Merit Cross. But in November 1944, whilst in the Saarland on his estate, he heard advancing American gunfire, and he then fled further into Germany. Von Papen was arrested by members of the 194th Glider Infantry Regiment on the 14th of April 1945. He was forced to visit a concentration camp to see what his Nazi regime had been doing, and he was then brought to the Nuremberg trials. However, the court and tribunal found no solid concrete evidence that showed that Franz von Papen had been involved in the annexation of Austria. The court said that he had committed a number of political immoralities, but these actions were not punishable by the charges of the trial. With this, he was acquitted of all charges, but the Soviets wanted him executed. He tried to restart a political career, but lived comfortably inside of a castle, and published many books and also his memoirs, and in his final years he gave many speeches, before he died on the 2nd of May 1969 at the age of 89. Another acquitted man was Dr Hjalmar Schacht, a prominent German economist and the co-founder of the German Democratic Party. He was a man who fiercely criticised the impositions of the Treaty of Versailles that they chained to Germany, and he also served as a president of the Reichsbank under the Weimar Republic. But Schacht served also in Hitler's government as the president of the Central Bank from 1933 to 1939, and he also served as a minister of economics. But when Hitler became Chancellor and then dictator, Schacht did criticise some of Hitler's policies, including the attacks against Jews in Germany. He also denounced Kristallnacht and distanced himself from it, and he proposed other plans which were less violent, in which Jewish property would be held in trust and used as a security for loans from abroad, which would then be guaranteed. But on the 20th of January 1939, Hitler sacked Hjalmar Schacht from his position as the president of the Reichsbank, and he was replaced by Walter Funk. Schacht was a Reich minister without portfolio, and he got the same salary, but was not allowed to participate in government business. He then retired to his house in the country, but he wrote to other Nazis such as Hermann Goering about his criticisms of Hitler, and in these notes during the Second World War. Hjalmar Schacht knew which way the war would end, and he knew it would end with the complete destruction of Germany. But he was hunted by other Nazis for defeatism, and Martin Bormann ordered him to return his golden party badge, but he was under watch by the Gestapo too. There has been some proposals that Schacht was involved with the German resistance to the Nazis early on. However, following the failed bombing attempt of Hitler's Wolf's Lair on the 20th of July 1944, Hjalmar Schacht was arrested 3 days later. He was then sent to Ravensbrück concentration camp and then Flossenburg, before he ended up inside of Dachau, the first camp that was opened. He was liberated inside of Tyrol by the US Fifth Army, but Schacht, despite being a prisoner of a concentration camp, was then arrested. He was a man who had supported Hitler's rise to power and had been a prominent official in government. He was brought to the Nuremberg trials for conspiracy and crimes against peace, but was importantly not charged with war crimes and crimes against peace. Schacht pled not guilty to all charges, and he claimed that he lost all his power before the Second World War, and that he had been involved in resistance activities, and he outlined what his life inside of a concentration camp was like. He was also not a member of the Nazi Party, and he did not share much of their ideology. He was acquitted of his charges, but of course the Soviets had other ideas, and they also wanted him executing. He was later sentenced to 8 years of hard labour in a West German denazification trial. After the war and his release, Schacht even started a bank, and he was an advisor in certain nations, but he died on the 3rd of June 1970. The third man acquitted in the Nuremberg trial was Hans Fritzsche, a man who was even questioned why he was sat with the other defendants. Fritzsche was a ministerial director at the Reich Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda. He was a German broadcaster, and it was said he was an entertaining presenter who offered some light during the war, and his voice was recognisable by most of the German population. He was incorporated into Joseph Goebbels' propaganda ministry, and he joined the Nazi Party in May 1933. Fritzsche became the head of the press division, and also was the head of the radio division. He had little power in creating policy, with Goebbels being the one who did this, but he was the most prominent radio commentator during the Second World War within Nazi Germany. He continued with his broadcasts, but in April 1945 he was for some reason inside of Hitler's bunker, the Führer bunker, with Goebbels. Hitler took his own life, and Goebbels assumed the role of Chancellor, and Goebbels completed his only official act in this role, requesting a ceasefire for Soviet General Vasily Choikov, and General Hans Krebs delivered this. Hans Fritzsche was still in the bunker, and he was asked by a drunk General Bergdorf if Berlin would be surrendered, and Fritzsche said he was going to do that. Bergdorf screamed at him saying that Hitler forbade the surrender of Berlin, and that Fritzsche, a civilian, had no power to do this. He was even threatened by Bergdorf, who pulled out his pistol to shoot him, and a radio technician then knocked the gun, and the bullet hit the ceiling. Bergdorf was then thrown out of the office, but Fritzsche then left the office and crossed to the Soviet lines and offered to surrender Berlin. The Soviets took him in for interrogation, and 3 gold teeth were pulled from his mouth during his torture, and Hans Fritzsche was also forced to stand in a standing coffin, an oubliette-style 3-foot square cell, and he could not sleep and was given minimal food. But he was then sent to the Nuremberg trials, and in his role in his radio broadcasts, it was said he played a part to further the actions of the Nazis and in justifying the aggressive war. But it was said by some of the defendants that no one in the courtroom, including Fritzsche, seemed to know why he was there. He was too small a fry, unless it was as a ghost for Goebbels. He was acquitted of his crimes, as it was said that the court was not prepared to hold that his broadcasts were intended to incite the German people to commit atrocities on conquered people. He was later sentenced to 9 years hard labour by a denazification court and was released in 1950, 3 years before he died from cancer. These 3 men were the men who managed to escape the hangman's noose or the prison cells of Spandau prison following Nuremberg. But there were 2 other defendants to comment on, as no decision was made regarding their actions. Robert Ley was the head of the German Labour Front from 1933 to 1945, and he held a number of positions including Gauleiters and Reichsleiters, but Ley was captured by the Americans. At Nuremberg he was indicted under Count 1, Count 3 and Count 4, relating to slave labour programmes. He was a man who stated, "Stand us against a wall and shoot us. Well and good, you are the victors, but why should I be brought before a tribunal?" 3 days after the indictment, Ley took his own life, strangling himself to death inside of his prison cell, using a noose made from a towel, which had been torn and then fastened to a toilet pipe. Thus no decision was made regarding his crimes. Also, Gustav Krupp von Bohlen und Hallbach also escaped further action, and he was the chairman of the board of Friedrich Krupp, an industry conglomerate, whose company made almost everything for the German war effort. They made U-boats, tanks, railway guns and much more, and Krupp produced the infamous Tiger I tank, but at the end of the war there were plans drawn up to prosecute him as a war criminal. However, these charges were then dropped, as he was a senile and bedridden old man who was considered medically unfit to stand trial. So these were the men who managed to escape prison time and also the hangman's noose following the Nuremberg trials. These men held various different positions and had different roles inside of Hitler's government and the Nazi Party, but some were also forced to serve hard labour later on after being found guilty in other trials by the Soviets. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.